haven't really had a theory of motivational interviewing so much that explains why it works. And I think this one does explain in part why this is working. And the provocative statement at the beginning of the article is that a clue to why motivational interviewing is effective may lie in our evolutionary past. Well, that's interesting, yeah. And he begins with discussion of social dominance behavior, which is very observable in many animal species and is highly evolved and promotes survival of a species, both by selecting the strongest to reproduce, but also you don't have to kill your species mates in order to establish that position. And so these elaborate rituals emerge to determine who's dominant in that particular situation, and then how to respond so you don't get killed. And so the yielding is another way to respond. You can counterattack, you can yield, you can run away. And those are basically the three responses to a power challenge like that. But none of those things promote behavior change, which is interesting. So I said, well, this sounds interesting. Then he moves to talking about psychological reactance. Now, that's a well-described phenomenon, but it hasn't really been explained. It just has been described that when people are pressured or are advised or coerced to make a change, they tend to not comply, to not do what they're being asked to do, and that seems to be almost a drive in the person. Well, why is that? Why is non-adherence something that appears to be attractive and reinforcing? Well, he says that here's a situation when you're being asked or challenged to change a behavior that is a dominance struggle. And he thinks this operates mostly at an unconscious level. But when someone is saying, you should do this, they are in a way asserting a superior position of dominance. And then often the person who's doing that has a higher status level anyhow. They have a white coat on or something like that. And so it, in a way, amplifies the whole thing. And he thinks in humans that the dance of dominance has been removed from specific contexts, kind of decontextualized, and it's just sort of something that we're scanning for, and that human beings are very sensitive to cues of a threat to your freedom or your status or your dominance. Not even consciously aware of it necessarily. So in that kind of situation where someone is saying you should do this, if you yield, if you comply, if you adhere, you're accepting a lower position in the social hierarchy. And it's sort of built into us not to do that automatically, that there's something useful about challenging that and just kind of maintaining your position in the social hierarchy. And so that's his sense of what reactance is about, that we just don't automatically give in to pressure or requests or advice to make a change like that. Okay, fair enough. There are big individual differences in this as well. So some people are exquisitely sensitive to any challenge to their dominance and tend to counterattack. Alcohol amplifies it, People who are characterologically angry tend to over-perceive hostility in other people that isn't there, that's neutral, but they see the facial expression as being hostile. And so there are these kind of personality characteristics that may predispose you to be even more reactive to anything like this. So there's that kind of variability as well. And then different contexts. In a context where there's a lot of authority-based discipline, and corrections is an example of that. Power is a big, big issue. And if you can get away with not complying, not adhering, then you tend to do that just to maintain your sense of, I'm a person who makes my own decisions. So there's that natural set to just kind of not do what people tell you to do. It's not a neutral situation. And he says that behavior change interventions are the perfect setup for reactance. That here's someone, usually someone with higher social status, advising someone to change their behavior. But the person who is the ultimate decider about this, the person who determines whether it's going to happen or not, is the person themselves. Nobody else can do that, So it's their own choice whether they're going to make this change in their lifestyle, and you can maintain your status by saying, at least privately, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And the more the pressure increases, the more the resistance to the change increases as well. And I used a story in my talk from Robert Hughes' History of Australia, The Fatal Shore, in which he recounts a convict's song about rum. And in essence, the convicts in the song are saying, I'm willing to be starved, to chain to the rock out in Sydney Harbor. I'm willing to be whipped with the cat of nine tails. I'm willing to be executed. Take the risk of death just to get rum, I mean, how much more severe can you make the punishment? You can't punish these things away, because the more you try to do that, the more the counterforce develops. So you have a scenario that can happen easily in leadership, where I'm going to tell you what to do, or I'm going to set the rules here, and people may or may not go along with that. They'll go along with it if they're afraid of the consequences of not doing so. If they're afraid they'll be punished for not doing it. But if there's some way of saving face, basically, they may not. So people don't automatically follow advice, and we all know that. So what is it about motivational interviewing? How is that relevant here, and how is that any different? And what Netto says is this is a powerful approach because it begins by saying to the other person, you're in charge. And when behavior change is the issue, it's just the truth also. There's nothing, no one else can make those decisions. So it is, it's also a truthful message. It's not a technique or something like that. And by doing that, you signal your status is safe. Your dominance is safe. You're not in any physical threat. You're not in any social dominance threat. This is a safe situation. When people don't feel that, he said that you get a lot of arousal in the limbic system, in the amygdala, and that's happening. You may not be aware of it, but we're just really attuned as humans to any threats to that. And when you then realize, oh, this is a safe situation, that stuff quiets down, and it stops inhibiting this stuff up here. So you can now think about things and have a conversation about things and make some decisions that are harder to make when you feel like you're being challenged and pressured and pushed and coerced and so on. And so I call that taking the lower place, drawing on a story from the Gospel of Luke. But you intentionally don't put yourself in the seat of authority. You intentionally choose a lower place, and giving other people the opportunity to invite you to come up, to say, let's talk, okay? But you automatically put yourself in the lower position. In leadership, that's been called sometimes servant leadership. That was my experience, and the further I went up a leadership hierarchy, the more people I worked for, and that's true. There's a truth to that too. It's not just a trick, that the success of your company depends on collaboration, cooperation, and even more so on people feeling like they're part of making it a success, and that their efforts are valued, and they're valued as people as well. So that's where this begins to overlap a little bit, and that I think things that we've learned from motivational interviewing might be useful in leadership. And one of them is this dynamic that when you pressure somebody to do something, there's an automatic pushback that it is not pathological, and it's not the person trying to be difficult or whatever. It's our nature. People don't like to be told what to do, basically. And finding a way to have those conversations and not trigger these unconscious defensive mechanisms is important. So many of the core skills that we use in motivational interviewing also signal, I respect you. You're in charge here. You get to make the decisions. I mean, one of the things we do is just overtly acknowledge personal choice, which is only telling the truth. It's because that is the truth. People get to make that choice. Just listening, good listening skills. When you're listening carefully to someone with no goal other than to understand who they are and what they mean and what they're thinking, that also says you're worth listening to. It's valuable to listen to you, and it matters to me. I care what you think about things. So without having to say that, you don't have to announce that. You just, by good listening, you're communicating that to people. Evocative questions, Well, how would you go about doing this? What ideas do you have for how this might happen? Again, that's respectful of the other person's intelligence and wisdom, which you want to use if you have a company that you're running. You depend on the kind of wisdom and creativity and activation of the people who work with you there. So many of the core things that we've settled into in motivational interviewing, I think, have the same collaborative, non-dominating, non-threatening way of being with people. And Carl Rogers, whose work is a foundation of what we do, in his last book called this a way of being. It's not a technique so much as a way of being with people. And given Netto's description, that makes sense. This is a way of being that says, I'm not trying to jerk you around here. I'm not trying to manipulate you. You're the person who gets to make these decisions. And we both have interest here, and let's talk about this. So it's a negotiating of change. So that one article just really, really struck me as telling us something about why this approach that I described 35 years ago now actually seems to fit well, and people recognize it, and why it crosses cultures.